Nolan Wells has now been laid to rest. The flowers have been placed. The memories have been shared. The family and friends who knew him best have said their final goodbye. But even after the funeral, one question remains unanswered. What really happened during Nolan Wells' final moments? Because while the world watched an 18-year-old being remembered, behind the scenes, a much bigger investigation continued. And now, several major developments have changed the direction of this case. First, the FBI has finally released a full public statement explaining its role in the investigation. After weeks of questions surrounding federal involvement, the Bureau has officially addressed why its resources were brought into the case. Second, the young woman connected to Nolan's final confirmed conversation has finally spoken directly, not through rumors, not through social media, not through someone else explaining what she allegedly said, but face-to-face with Nolan's own mother. Her account does not answer every question, but it changes the way many people have been looking at the timeline. And third, new details have surfaced about the investigation itself, how many people have been questioned, what happened to Nolan's phone, and who is paying for the independent examination the family demanded. Tonight, we are breaking down everything we know: the funeral, the FBI statement, the threat investigation, Katie's conversation with Nolan's mother, the autopsy delay, the path to a grand jury, and the evidence investigators are still working to uncover. Because Nolan Wells may have been buried, but the investigation into what happened to him is far from over. Before any of this, before the search, before the FBI, before the grand jury talk, Nolan Wells was simply an 18-year-old from Ocean Springs, Mississippi, just a few months into life at Southwest Mississippi Community College, where he played wide receiver for the football team. Friends who knew him described someone who showed up for people, the kind of teammate who cheered louder for others than for himself. The night before the trip, he cooked dinner for his mother after she got home from work, then left to spend the night at a friend's house so the group could leave early the next morning for Horn Island. That was the last time his parents saw him in person. Horn Island itself is part of what makes this case so difficult to piece together. It's a barrier island off Mississippi's Gulf Coast, popular with 4th of July boaters, but it has no shelters, no facilities, and no cell service once you're far enough from the mainland. It's the kind of place where a group can spread out for hours, with almost no way to check in with each other, and where a single missed connection can go unnoticed until it's too late. That's part of why the boat itself has become a focus for investigators. Reports have surfaced of mechanical trouble with the boat on July 4th, along with separate questions about exactly where it was anchored or positioned when the group was preparing to leave. Neither detail has been fully explained publicly, but both are now part of the broader effort to reconstruct, minute by minute, how a large group trip ended, with one person not making it back. For most families, a funeral is the final moment of goodbye. A private moment. A chance to remember someone for who they were before tragedy changed everything. But Nolan Wells' funeral happened under circumstances almost impossible to imagine. His family was forced to say goodbye while still waiting for answers. They buried their son while major questions remained unresolved. The service was held at Center Point Church in Ocean Springs, Mississippi, with visitation beginning that morning before the ceremony. Civil rights leader Reverend Al Sharpton officiated. A celebration of life followed at the Jackson County Fairgrounds, a gathering his mother, Christine Wonsley, described as something Nolan himself would have wanted, telling reporters he wouldn't have wanted the people who loved him sitting around in sorrow. Behind that funeral was a wave of support most families never see. Filmmaker Tyler Perry covered the funeral costs, saying he understood what it meant not to have the answers a grieving family desperately needs. Former NFL quarterback Colin Kaepernick stepped in separately, funding an independent autopsy the family requested after growing frustrated with the pace of official updates. That independent autopsy was not conducted in Mississippi. Attorney Ben Crump, who represents the family, confirmed Nolan's body was flown out of state to Washington, D.C., specifically so the examination could be performed by a doctor with no ties to Mississippi law enforcement. The family wanted separation. They wanted a second set of eyes with nothing to gain or lose from either conclusion. The official investigation continued. The autopsy results were still pending. The examination of evidence was still ongoing. And the question that brought worldwide attention to this case remained. How did an 18-year-old disappear from Horn Island and end up dead? The funeral represented an emotional turning point. Before the burial, every update carried the weight of a countdown. A family preparing to do something no parent should ever have to do. After the burial, the focus changed. The emotional chapter had reached its first ending. Now came the evidence chapter. The chapter where investigators must move beyond public theories and focus on facts. Because in a case surrounded by speculation, the difference between a theory and evidence is everything. For weeks, one question followed this investigation. Why was the FBI involved? The presence of federal agents immediately created speculation. Some people believed FBI involvement meant something much bigger had been discovered. Others believed it suggested the investigation had secretly escalated. But after days of limited comment, the FBI finally addressed the question directly. The FBI's Jackson Field Office released a statement explaining that the Bureau had been assisting Jackson County investigators, describing a long-standing, trusted partnership between the two agencies. The statement made one thing very clear. Jackson County remains the agency leading the investigation. The Bureau said it would keep supporting local investigators only as far as its resources could add clarity for Nolan's family and community. That distinction is extremely important. Because FBI involvement does not automatically mean the FBI has taken over. It means local investigators are receiving additional support. Jackson County Sheriff John Ledbetter offered a piece of context that reframed the entire conversation. Horn Island itself sits on federal land. Because of that, his office regularly works alongside the FBI on cases tied to the island. This was not, in his words, out of the ordinary. Ledbetter also confirmed the FBI's specific role in this case, helping examine the digital evidence that had already been collected. The wording of the FBI's public statement was also significant. It was careful, measured, deliberate. This was not a statement announcing an arrest. It was not a statement announcing a breakthrough. It was not a statement saying investigators had solved the mystery. Instead, it appeared designed to answer one specific concern. Why are federal resources involved in a local investigation? The answer, in the Bureau's own words, centered on one phrase. The FBI said it was working to address interstate threats received by individuals connected to the case. This is where the concept of an interstate threat becomes important. An interstate threat generally involves threatening communication that crosses state lines. That can include messages, online communication, calls, or other forms of contact. The FBI is specifically equipped to investigate these situations because they can move beyond one local jurisdiction. But this creates another important distinction. The FBI's involvement appears connected to threats surrounding the case, not necessarily because Nolan's death itself has become a federal matter. That difference matters, because public discussion often jumps from the FBI is involved to something major must have happened. But investigators have not publicly confirmed that. What they have confirmed is narrower. Federal resources are being used, threats occurred, and those threats are being investigated. The threats were not abstract. Jackson County Chancery Judge Ashley Cole posted publicly that her own family had received death threats as the case exploded online. Tristan Shepard, one of the friends who was on Horn Island with Nolan that day, and who has described him as one of his closest friends, told reporters the threats aimed at him and others weighed on him. He said it worried him not just for himself, but for his friends and his family. The FBI has not publicly identified who sent those threats, or every person who received them. But the pattern is clear. As this case gained national attention, some of the people closest to it, friends, officials, a sitting judge, became targets simply for their proximity to the story. In an investigation where memories conflict and timelines become unclear, investigators often turn to something that does not forget. A phone, a device that records moments without emotion, without assumptions, without changing its story. Nolan Wells's phone has become one of the most important pieces of evidence in this investigation. And one new detail changes how people should think about it. According to his best friend, Javon Williams, both he and Nolan left their phones behind on the boat before heading onto the island that day. Nolan's phone was later recovered on that same boat, meaning whatever digital trail exists from his final hours on Horn Island itself may be limited. The examination now underway is being handled by both law enforcement and the family's independent investigators, working in coordination rather than isolation. That cooperation is significant because both sides are asking the same question: can the device that was with him and the one he left behind reveal what happened during the hours nobody can fully account for? But a phone does not automatically solve a case. It only provides information. A location does not explain why someone was there. A message does not always explain the full conversation. The evidence has to be placed back into the timeline, and right now, that timeline still has gaps. Sheriff Ledbetter has said his detectives have interviewed roughly 60 witnesses since Nolan's body was recovered. The 3 friends who were on the boat with him that day have each been interviewed in depth. Investigators have also been looking into reports of boat trouble on July 4th, along with questions about exactly where that boat was positioned when Nolan was last seen. 60 witnesses, 3 friends interviewed multiple times, a recovered phone that may have been left behind before the moments that matter most, and still, no cause of death, no toxicology report, no final answer. For investigators, the cause and manner of death are among the most important findings in any death investigation. They help determine what direction the case should take. A medical examination may answer questions such as, was drowning consistent with the circumstances? Were there injuries? Was there evidence of trauma? Were there substances present that could have played a role? These answers matter because different findings lead investigators down very different paths. An accidental death investigation follows one path. A suspicious death investigation follows another. A homicide investigation follows another entirely. And until those results are available, many possibilities remain open. As of the most recent updates, both the state medical examiner's official autopsy and the family's independent autopsy remain unfinished. Officials have said they are still waiting on a toxicology report, a process that routinely takes weeks, even in cases with far less public attention. Crump has said he hopes to release the independent findings soon, but has not committed to a firm date. This is one of the hardest realities for Nolan's family. They have already experienced the most painful moment, burying their son. But the investigation continues afterward. The questions continue afterward. The waiting continues afterward. Another major development in this case is the confirmed path toward a grand jury. Understanding what that means is important because many people misunderstand the role of a grand jury. A grand jury does not automatically mean someone has been accused. It does not mean investigators have already decided what happened. A grand jury is a process where evidence can be presented for review. This became more than a possibility after Crump and the Wells family sat down directly with Jackson County District Attorney Angel Myers McElrath, the first meeting of its kind since Nolan's body was recovered. Crump described the conversation as respectful, with both sides speaking candidly. Following that meeting, officials confirmed that once the sheriff's investigation is complete, its findings, all of them, will be presented to a grand jury. Crump was direct about what the family expects from that process. Nothing held back, nothing overlooked, every relevant fact and every witness put in front of the jury. At this stage, several investigations and reviews are happening at the same time. The Jackson County Sheriff's Office investigation, the district attorney's coordination toward a grand jury presentation, the family's independent investigation, led by Crump's team, the phone examination, being handled jointly, the state autopsy, and the independent, Kaepernick-funded autopsy in Washington, D.C., the FBI's review of the interstate threats. Each one has a different purpose. Each one answers different questions. The challenge is making sure one piece of information is not mistaken for the entire picture. One of the biggest challenges in the Nolan Wells case has been the speed at which information spread. Before investigators could confirm details, theories were already circulating, and several widely discussed claims later required clarification. One example involved a photograph that some people believed showed Nolan alive after the July 4th incident. Later information indicated the image was taken before Nolan was ever on Horn Island. The photo was real, the interpretation surrounding it was not. Another example involved a viral video that many believed showed Nolan involved in an argument. That claim was also questioned. According to people close to the case, the voice heard in that video was not Nolan's. These examples reveal something important about this case. A real image does not always mean a correct conclusion. A real video does not always tell the story people think it tells. Context matters, timing matters, verification matters, and that is why investigators continue to emphasize facts over speculation. Because in a case with this much public attention, misinformation can become its own obstacle. Now to the development that has reshaped the entire timeline. The young woman known publicly as Katie. For weeks, her identity and her account were among the most contested parts of this case. Some online speculation questioned whether she even existed or whether she herself had gone missing alongside Nolan. Her family moved quickly to correct that. A relative posted publicly to confirm she was safe and had never been missing, and that she had been in contact with Nolan's family since the early days of the search. She has since been identified in reporting as Katie McCormack. Her mother, Gracie McCormack, said publicly that her daughter had been with Nolan on the island before they parted ways, but that Katie had no insight into what happened to him afterward. That single detail, what happened after the two parted ways, is where the case's biggest contradiction lives. According to Crump, Katie's own account is that Nolan told her he was heading back to rejoin his friends on the boat, but Nolan's friends have told investigators the opposite, that Nolan told them he was staying behind to keep talking with her. Javon Williams, Nolan's best friend, has said the last time he physically saw Nolan was around 3 in the afternoon as the group prepared to leave the island, and that Nolan was with Katie and others at that point. Two accounts, pointing in opposite directions, both centered on the same few minutes. That contradiction is exactly why Nolan's mother, Christine Wonsley, sought out Katie directly rather than relying on second-hand accounts. The two met face to face. Wonsley has since said publicly that the story Katie gave her did not fully match what she had been told by others close to the case, and that inconsistencies remain, particularly around who actually saw Nolan last and where he was standing when they did. By Katie's own telling, she and Nolan spent time together that day, then went their separate ways. She returned to the boat with her own friends. She has said she assumed Nolan made it back onto his friend's boat to head home, but that she never actually watched him get on it. She assumed. She never confirmed it herself. That single gap between an assumption and a confirmed sighting is where the missing piece of this timeline may be hiding. Speaking publicly about the toll of the last several weeks, Wonsley has described a mother caught between mourning and protecting what's left of her family, saying plainly that some days the weight of it all feels like more than she can carry. Beyond evidence and investigations, there is another part of this story that cannot be ignored: the people. Because every name connected to this case belongs to a real person. Every witness, every friend, every family member, every person who happened to be near Nolan that day. The attention surrounding this case has been enormous, and with that attention has come intense public pressure, questions, accusations, online arguments, and now, confirmed threats reaching a sitting judge and Nolan's own friends. The FBI's involvement in investigating those threats highlights an important issue. People must be able to provide information without fear. Witnesses must be able to speak. Families must be able to grieve. Investigators must be able to follow evidence without outside pressure changing the process. Finding answers requires cooperation, and cooperation becomes harder when people feel unsafe. After everything that has happened, where does the case actually stand? Let's separate what is known from what remains unanswered. What we know. The FBI has confirmed involvement in assisting the investigation, citing its long-standing partnership with Jackson County. The FBI has confirmed it is working to address interstate threats connected to the case, including threats made against a sitting judge and against friends who were with Nolan on the island. Jackson County remains the lead investigative agency, aided by federal digital evidence resources. Sheriff Ledbetter has confirmed roughly 60 witnesses have been interviewed, including the 3 friends who were on the boat with Nolan. Nolan's phone was recovered on the boat, not with him on the island. The Wells family met directly with the Jackson County District Attorney, and officials have confirmed the completed investigation will be presented to a grand jury. An independent, privately funded autopsy was conducted in Washington, D.C., separate from Mississippi law enforcement. Katie McCormack has been publicly identified and has spoken with Nolan's mother directly. Katie has said Nolan told her he intended to return to his friends. His friends say Nolan told them he was staying behind with her. Katie has said she never actually watched Nolan get on the boat. She assumed he had. What we still don't know. What happened after Nolan's final confirmed conversation? Did Nolan attempt to return toward his friends, as Katie's account suggests? Did something interrupt that plan? What does the phone evidence, limited as it may be, actually reveal? What will the official and independent autopsies determine, including the pending toxicology results? Who sent the threats the FBI is investigating? Will the grand jury process uncover evidence that finally explains the final moments of Nolan's life? Those unanswered questions are the reason this investigation continues. Nolan Wells has now been buried. His family has said goodbye, surrounded by a community, and by public figures who never met him, who stepped in to carry some of the weight. But the story surrounding his death is not finished, because closure does not come from a funeral. Closure comes from answers. And those answers will not come from the loudest voices online. They will come from evidence, from investigators, from science, from facts that can be verified. The FBI statement answered one major question: why were federal resources involved? The confirmation of a grand jury path answered another: what happens once the investigation is complete? Katie's conversation with Nolan's mother answered a third: what did Nolan say he planned to do in his final confirmed exchange? But the biggest question remains: what happened between that final conversation and the moment Nolan was gone? That is the missing piece, the moment investigators are trying to reconstruct, the moment Nolan's family needs explained. Every investigation eventually reaches a point where speculation has to end, where theories disappear, where only evidence remains. And right now, this case is waiting for those answers. The phone, the autopsy, the toxicology report, the grand jury, the evidence. Together, they may reveal what happened during Nolan Wells's final moments. Until then, one thing remains certain. Behind every headline is a family that lost a son, a community that lost someone they cared about, and an 18-year-old whose final chapter is still waiting to be fully understood.